Hi everyone, today we're going to briefly look at interest. This lesson is mainly aimed at grade 11s, but grade 12s would also benefit from this. Let's get started. So, first of all, the topic that it will be under is obviously finance. And we need to remember that we need to know the difference between those 6 terms. So if we have a look at the 6 terms once again, and then their definitions. Interest is always going to be an amount. So the interest in this case would be the amount of money that you are charged by the lender of the money. So for instance, the bank, that's obviously if it's a loan. If it's an interest rate, it's going to be a percentage. If we are looking at a loan, that's when we borrow money, when we really need the money and we'll pay interest on that money. And an investment is normally when you invest money into something. Simple interest is what you learned in grade 10. It's calculated on the original amount and the amount stays the same each time it is paid. And then compound interest is calculated on the current balance. And therefore that will change every time you pay the amount. Now, remember that interest can be paid or earned depending on the situation. So you'll pay interest when you are borrowing money and you will earn interest when you are investing money. We need to make sure that we read the questions carefully to understand what is being asked of us in this question. So, let's look at some calculations. The first type of calculation we need to be able to do says how to calculate interest values using interest rates. So in this case, it's telling you that Karen is going to invest 3,000 Rand at a simple interest rate of 7.5%. Calculate her interest for the year. Now remember that interest has to be an amount. So if we start the calculation, for example 1, it's going to be 3,000 Rand times 7.5 over 100, because remember it's 7.5%. And when we do that, we get 225 Rand. So that was the interest for the year. Question A. Question B. Calculate her total investment value. So now what we need to remember is she invested 3,000 Rand. She got an additional 225 Rand as interest. So we need to add these two together. That gives us a total of 3,225 Rands. Now, that was a nice and easy example of how to use interest rates to calculate the interest values. If we move on to this one, how to calculate interest values again, it's the same type of question. However, it's now saying Sabelo took out a loan of 10,000 Rand and had to pay back the bank 16,780 Rand in total. How much interest did he pay? So please note, in the first example, you were earning interest. In this example, you are paying interest. So in this case, the total that he had to pay back was 16,780. His loan was 10,000. So that gives us 6,780 Rand worth of interest. Now, if we move on to example 3, it's giving us questions only about interest rates. Now, remember that interest rates have got to do with percentages. So they're telling us that the annual interest rate is 12.5%. They're asking then for the monthly, the quarterly, and the weekly interest rate. So that's nice and easy. If we need to work out the monthly interest rate, it will be 12.5%, and we'll divide it by 12 because there's 12 months in a year. And when we do that, it will be 1.04%. Then they ask us for the quarterly. So in other words, if something is divided into a quarter, you divide it by 4. So then if we say 12.5 and we divide it by 4, then we end up with 3.125%. per quarter. And then the final question here, question C, what was the weekly interest rate? And then 12.5%. We know that there's 52 weeks in a year, so we divide it by 52. And that gives me a total of 0.24%. So that is question 3. Now, if we start looking at simple interest, this is what you did last year. Remember, we said that the definition was that we're going to use the same amount every time we calculate it, and it's calculated on the original amount. It's the same amount each time it is paid, and then also we are not allowed to use any formula. We haven't been so far, and your graph will always form a straight line, even over a long time period. So let's jump into it. Gabby takes out a loan of 4,000 Rand at 8% simple interest per annum. Per annum means for 1 year. How much interest will she need to pay in the first year? So we have a lot of important information. We know that Gabby's loan is 4,000 Rand. We know it's 8%, and we know it's simple interest. So let's have a look at the first example. She's going to have 4,000 Rands worth in a loan, and we have to multiply it with 8% or 0.08. If you want to, I'll show you. We can do it like that, because that's 8% obviously, and that gives us 320 Rand. So now what we need to remember is this is the interest for 1 year, but because it's simple interest, the amount will stay the same every year. So question B, if the loan term is 3 years, how much will she pay back in total? So in other words, she'll pay this interest amount 3 times, once every year. And when we calculate that, we get 960 Rands worth of interest. So she'll have to pay back the 4,000 plus the 960, which will be 4,960 Rands. Question C asked us how much interest. So now you can either look at this and say, okay, I've calculated it already, or just to check that you know that you are correct, you take the total amount she repays, and from that you subtract the original loan amount. And that gives us the 960 Rand, which is exactly the same as what we had here. Now, if we move on to example 2, it's telling us that Cole invested 5,000 Rand at 6.5% simple interest per annum. So once again, the amount that's being invested is important, the interest rate is important, and the fact that it is simple interest. Now they're asking us to complete the table alongside, which we can see over there, and then we're going to have to draw a graph. So if we look at example 2, we are going to see the question says over here, year 1, 2, and 3. So in other words, if the value of the investment is 5,325 Rands after year 1, we will now need to make sure that we just very, very quickly calculate how much interest there was. So that's actually not too difficult, because he invested 5,000 Rand and it's now worth 5,325. We can just take that and subtract the original amount, which gives me 325 Rand. That was the interest for year 1. And if we look at year 2 and year 3, the interest amount stays the same. So to calculate in year 3 the value of the investment, it would be the 5,650 from year 2, and to that we add 325 Rands, and when we do that we get 5,975 Rands. So now we have completed the 2 parts of the table that were still to be completed. So now we have to draw a graph showing the worth of his investment. And what I've done here is I've just drawn the graph for us already. So if we look here, we'll see the value of the investment, the number of years, and then you see the beautiful straight line that we were talking about. Now, if we look at compound interest, we need to remember that we are going to calculate this on the current balance. Therefore, the amount of interest that you are going to pay or that you are going to earn is going to change every time it is calculated. And then we are not allowed to use a formula once again. And in the long run, our graph will not be a straight line. So let's look at some questions. The first question says, Ryan decides to invest 2,000 Rand at 7.5% compound interest for 2 years. So once again, the same information is important. And then the time period being 2 years. How much interest? Remember, that's the extra amount. What is his investment worth? That is going to be the final for that year. What will it be worth after 2 years is the final worth. And how much interest is the extra amount that he get in total for those 2 years. So let's start. Example 1A. How much interest does he earn in year 1? So we'll take the 2,000 Rand that he invested. We will multiply that with 7.5%. And when we do that, we get 150 Rand of interest that he earned. And that answers the question in A, because A is asking us how much interest. Then it asks us, question B, what is his investment worth after year 1? So it was 2,000 that was originally invested. He got an extra 150. So he now has 2,150 Rand. The next question is, what will his investment be worth after 2 years? So remember, this is the worth of the investment after 1 year. So now we're going to have to repeat the steps, but the amount of interest is going to change. So for year 2, he's going to start with 2,150, which is the balance of this year. And we're going to multiply that with the 7.5%. So that is so important to remember, because you'll see that the interest amount actually gets more. Where in simple interest, the interest amount stays exactly the same. So this is his interest for year 2, but the question is asking, what will it be worth after 2 years? So therefore it will be worth 2,150, which I got from there, plus 161 Rands and 25 cents. And that gives me a total worth of 2,311 Rands and 25 cents. Question D is asking us, how much interest did he earn in total? So that is nice and easy. We can take the final value of his investment and from that subtract the original amount he invested, and that gives me 311 Rands and 25 cents. Alternatively, you could have looked at the amount of interest for year 1. You could have looked at the amount of interest for year 2, added those two together, and you would have still had the same answer that we have over there. Now, the next question says, Cara took out a loan of 1,500 Rand, repayable over 2 years at 15% compound interest. So once again, if we have to underline the important words, all the same things will be important. 2 years, 15%, and it is compound interest. So now if we have a look at the table alongside, we'll see again the years on here, and it tells us in year 1 the interest payable was 0 Rand, because that's when she took out the loan and the total loan was the same. So now we have to work out what's going to happen in year 1. So if we start looking at that, we have all the information that is important to us. So remember, they can ask these type of questions in a table as well. So if we look at example 2, question A, she took out a loan of 1,500 Rand. it was 15% of that. So in other words, she is going to be paying interest of 225 Rand. So that will be the amount of interest. And then the table also asked how much it's worth. So it's 1,500 plus 225 gives me a total worth of 1,725 Rands. So that is question A answered. The interest and then the amount in the table, the final. So draw a graph indicating her loan amount after 2 years. So if we go on, I'll show you again. Once again, I've drawn it for you already. So now what you'll see is basically that it looks like a straight line still. So what we need to remember is in the long run, it's not going to end up looking like a straight line. But in this case, it is because it was a very short time period that we actually calculated. So I'm going to quickly show you another example. So here you can now see comparing interest in graphs, and here you can now see we are going to be working with simple and compound interest. So if you have a look here you can see that the line that's going up is going to be, let me just point it out for you, this line that's going up is actually compound interest, and this line that's going up in a straight interval is going to be simple interest. So here they also indicated it to you, but now they can also ask us to answer some questions on a graph. So instead of asking us to draw the graph, we can be asked to answer questions about the graph. So let's have a look. What is the investment term? So that's obviously how long the money is invested for, and that you'll see if we look on here is 40 years. What is the interest rate? And that you can't really tell from the graph, but if we look at the heading of the graph, it tells us it's 8%. So it's either simple or compound, depending on which one they choose. What is the future value of compound and simple interest after 30 years? So compound interest and simple interest. So if we just have a look, they actually were nice enough to indicate to us what's going to happen after 30 years. So compound interest is going to be 1,006,27, and simple interest was going to be 340. Now, the last question here is, which investment would you advise someone to take? If we look at this over the 40 years, this one ends up much more. So when you invest money, you want to make more money. So therefore, in this case, we would definitely advise someone to take the compound interest option. All right, so let's just have another look at something like a loan agreement. So what's important there is that this can use simple or compound interest. We will be paying interest because it's a loan. The amounts will be calculated on the total loan period or the term. So when you take out the loan, you agree to repaying it over a certain amount of time. Loans are normally repayable in equal monthly installments. So they do the calculations about what the total worth is going to be, and then you pay them back every month. For loans, the smaller your final loan amount, the better the deal, because you don't want to pay back too much. So therefore, in most cases, a smaller interest rate is a good idea. If we look at something like this, here we can just see from Standard Bank for a loan. Here it's giving us different amounts. It's for a home loan, different amounts, and then the different interest rates. Okay. If we look at investments, we need to remember, once again, this can use simple or compound interest. We will be earning interest because we're investing money. The amounts are calculated on the total investment period or the term of the investment. The investments can be paid out as monthly installments, which happens in most cases with a retirement annuity, or then as a lump sum, which is like a fixed deposit account where you get all your money at once. For an investment, the bigger your final investment amount, the better the deal, because it means you getting more money out for the money that you invested. So if we have a look at this, for instance, if we are going to have a fixed deposit account and we put the money away for 24 months, we'll get 5.4% interest. But if we end up putting it away for 60 months, we'll get 7.65%. Now, if we just look at repaying a loan, we'll see here that when you repay a loan, the remaining loan balance in your account becomes lower and lower and lower. So always remember, you are going to take out a loan, but every time you repay the loan, you owe them less of the total loan. And then if we just look at changing interest rates on investments, here you can just see the difference that different interest rates actually can have on the future value of your investment. In this case, 12% interest, which is the highest interest rate, will give you the highest total value at the end. And then just quickly, if we look at interest on bank accounts, we see that interest can be earned or paid using different periods. It can be calculated or compounded daily or monthly. With a credit card, you pay interest. With a savings account, you earn interest. And if we just look at this, for instance, it's telling us credit cards have a maximum interest rate of 20.5% a year. And then on a savings account, you also have different interest rates. So there we go. That's the first part of this unit in your book. It's just about interest, and I hope that this helped.